as this was unfolding on television, Donald Trump was walking around the White House confused about why other people on his team weren't as excited as he was, as you had rioters pushing against Capitol Police trying to get into the building. As it was happening, he was delighted.
Where anyone with a functioning soul would be revolted and disgusted or simply dismayed that his words unleashed such mayhem, Senator Sasse, a Republican, says the president was delighted. And according to a spokesman for Utah Senator Mike Lee, both the president and the husk of a human, once known as Rudy Giuliani, were also working the phones, trying to call newly elected Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville so they could press him to delay certification of the electoral vote. Think about that. As the mob was descending on the Capitol, making death threats to lawmakers there, the president was, at the very same moment, calling senators, trying to pressure them into keeping up his election con. Now, we know this because the calls mistakenly went to Senator Lee's cell phone, as he and others were sheltering in a temporary holding area. He then handed the phone, according to reports, to Senator Tuberville. That's where the president's thoughts were as lawmakers and staffers tried just to survive the moment. Because of course, because no matter how many words he reads off the teleprompter about healing and unity and love, there's no room inside him for any of that. To him, those are all loser words, along with responsibility and accountability. We're now in all this from our chief White House correspondent, Jim Acosta, and CNN's chief political correspondent, Dana Bash. Jim, has the White House reacted to the president's Twitter ban? Is there any expectation of when he next communicates how does he communicate? Are his spokespeople actually going to have to start, speaking?
Well, that would be something, Anderson. It shudders the mind to think about this. Maybe the president might actually come into the briefing room and take questions. But at this point, no. What I'm told by a White House official is that there are internal deliberations going on right now as to what to do about all of this. Keep in mind, we were hearing from our sources earlier this evening that the president was going to put out some sort of video statement, yet another video statement. We don't know what the contents of that statement was going to be, but they were planning on tweeting that out on the president's Twitter account. And in the words of this White House official, the way this White House official was explaining it, they don't know what to do now, and now they're exploring other alternatives. But Anderson, it needs to be said that, one of the reasons why Twitter did this is because of this potential for the president to incite further violence, the kind of violence you were just laying out at the beginning of the show. And that is something that Twitter says in its statement that it was very worried about, that they were worried about plans for future armed protests that have already begun proliferating on and off Twitter regarding some sort of planning for potentially a secondary attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 17th of this year, right before the inauguration. And so they took action, according to Twitter, because they were worried about what might be coming next. And, the White House can try to work around that, but that is just a damning statement, a damning set of events that this White House is having to deal with this evening.
Yeah, also a reminder just how much advance notice there was about the attack on the Capitol and the plans, or at least the desire to have insurrection on January 6th was on social media. It's a reminder of that. Dana, the last tweet from the president before his account was shut down was him saying he'll not be attending the inauguration on January 20th. What do you think the next move is for him?
Well, we don't know. And how ironic that the man who got the nomination in the first place snatched it from, 16 other Republicans by using his social media is now completely hamstrung, sitting in one of the most powerful buildings in the world, holding the most powerful office in the world, because he can't use that medium anymore or other, social media. It's kind of crazy. He's got the biggest megaphone and he doesn't know how to use it. It boggles the mind. So that's the first thing that they need to do. And it's not as if the Trump orbit didn't know that Twitter was eventually, he obviously had gotten flagged on tweet after tweet after tweet, especially over the past couple of months. But I'm told that even earlier this year, towards the beginning of the campaign year, last year, I should say, 2020, there were discussions about whether they should move the president's tweeting to a separate platform, because it wasn't a question of if Twitter and other more mainstream social media platforms were going to ban him, but when. And now it has happened. As clearly it should be, given what Jim was just reporting.
Jim, do we know what the president's days are like? I mean, what is he doing? Because, I mean, you said they're meeting about what to do about him on Twitter. Clearly, he's not meeting about, what to do about Americans dying every few seconds in this country from coronavirus.
Well, up until January 6th, Anderson, he was plotting a procedural coup, and he was strong-arming the vice president and trying to get senators to go along with some sort of procedural coup on January 6th when they were tabulating the electoral votes, certifying Joe Biden's election. But in terms of what he's been doing over the last couple of days, I will tell you, this White House has been in crisis management mode. They have been reaching out to outside lawyers about the potential for impeachment, about the potential for the vice president and the cabinet invoking the 25th Amendment. We don't think that's going to happen at this point. And so I've been told there have been many meetings, but the president, according to multiple sources that I've been in touch with, is just not dealing with reality. He's been unstable, ranting and raving and so on. And in terms of being taken off of Twitter, I mean, it makes you wonder what he's going to do next. This, in a way, will be seen by the president as a provocative act. He has been emasculated to some extent by Twitter this evening, because if you think about it, and Dana was alluding to this, you think about of all the toys Donald Trump likes to play with, it's his Twitter account that he prizes most of all. And to take that away from him, I think, is an emasculating moment. It's like when Air Force One and the Beast are taken away from him on January 20th. His toys are being taken away from him, and it's not going to sit well with this president, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, Dana, beyond the Twitter ban, the most likely consequence the president could face looks to be a second impeachment. Is it clear? I mean, is there enough time for something like that?
Yes, for the House to impeach him, there certainly is. The House Democrats are planning on moving in warp speed, Anderson. I mean, I was talking to a top House Democrat earlier who said, likely it could happen as early next week. It's kind of remarkable when you think about what normally happens, not as if an impeachment is normal, certainly not to do it twice, but because, our Hill team got the draft of the article, the singular article of impeachment that they're working on. It's pretty clear cut. And it's not as if they need to do investigating or, hold lengthy hearings about what happened. As members of Congress have said to me and others, they experienced it, and we saw it. We saw it with our. It's not as if it was a transcript of a call. The president went to this rally and incited, with his words, this group of protesters to become a mob and to become rioters and ransack one of the most important buildings, in the world, while they were doing the business of their constitutional duty, actually written in the Constitution, to certify the Electoral College. So it could happen very quickly. The open question, which maybe isn't even much of a question, is what happens after that, how the Senate is going to deal with it, whether Mitch McConnell, in his waning days as majority leader, is just going to run out the clock and try to avoid having a trial. That is probably the most likely scenario, but we are in real uncharted territory here.
Yeah. Dan Bash, Jim Acosta, thanks. Joining us now, a central figure in the last impeachment hearings, Connecticut Democratic Congressman Jim Himes. Congressman, your reaction to the president being banned from Twitter, and frankly, do you think this week's insurrection could have been avoided if Twitter had maybe taken the step before?
I have a very mixed reaction to the president being removed from Twitter. Anderson, it's not being talked about enough, but in addition to accountability for what the president has done, there is a lot of thought being put into how is there any way to remove him from the Oval Office. This is a man who incited a situation where the presidential line of succession, the vice president, the Speaker of the House, the Speaker pro tem of the Senate, were at risk. There appears to have been, we don't know the whole story, but a break in the military chain of command with respect to the deployment of the National Guard. The issues don't get more serious than that, Anderson. And so there's a lot of thought, not exactly about accountability. That's a whole other conversation that will extend for a year. But to answer your question, when I heard that the president's Twitter account had been revoked, I thought, well, that's good. That's one means of not inciting violence. But as your guests were pointing out on the show, how is he psychologically going to react to that? Again, I'm very focused on the fact that this is a man who still is in charge of American nuclear forces. He is still the most powerful man on the planet. And guess what? I bet he's more than a little grumpy right now. So I don't quite know how to think about that. But I do think that it doubles down the importance of thinking about those ways that, low probability that they may be, that could separate this man from the ability to launch a nuclear strike, amongst other things.
Well, I mean, it doesn't seem like the 25th Amendment would require Vice President Pence taking action with a majority of the cabinet, I guess, in secret, so that the president couldn't fire them first. And then the president would have a chance to essentially, say that he is completely capable of continuing on. Then they would have to kind of counter that. That just seems highly unlikely, correct?
Well, it's all highly unlikely. And yes, of course. And that's, of course, what makes